Okay. Akiva, how are you feeling?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. I'm bouncing around a little bit. We'll get better soon.
Baruch Havaya, not Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Havaya. Okay.
Okay. So what we did on Erev Shabbos was the Gemara had an interesting shaila. We know that the Tumah of the Shedra and the Golgolas, they have a higher degree of Tumah than every other bone because they're unique in that a Shedra or a Golgolas, or both, depending on the shaila of the Gemara, are going to create a Tumah Mace. They'll be Mitama Ba'oil, even though they're not Roiv Minyan, they're not Roiv Binyan. So you see they have a higher level of Tumah. So the Gemara was probing. We know that if you have a container full of bones, if you have a half a leg, then if you have a half a roiva, then it's not a half a roiva, it's a half a leg, it's a half a kav. If you have a half a kav, then it's matama tumas meis, it's matama ba'oil b'mag v'mas. That's regular bones, but maybe since the shedron and gogoilas are more tome, they have a stronger potential for tuma. Maybe then even a roiva at some ways would be matama. That was the shaila that the Gemara asked. The Gemara tried to be poshed from different places, and the Gemara never succeeded in being poshed. So that was the first part of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Then we had an interesting analysis of how this Psak Halacha came out. Now, our Mishnah tells us that although a roiva akav of bones is metamayu or tumas meis, and you need to get zrikas of the paraduma on day 3 and on day 7, and the same thing was with the ris of dam. Nevertheless, it will not break your naziris and destroy your count that you've done until this point, unless there's a chatzi kav of bones and not a two revision of dam. That's what our Mishnah taught us. However, the Gemara brings down that the Chachamim Arishonim, the Titans of Psak, had a machlokes. One group of Chachamim said that a roiva kav of a tzambos and a revius of dam is fully metama and it's even social naziris. The other group said it's not metama and it's not social naziris. So this hybrid version that our Mishnah had, where it's metama but it's not social naziris, where does it come from? And how could our Mishnah that's later than the Titans quoted in the Gemara, the Chachamim Arishonim, how can our Mishnah make that compromise? So the Gemara answered that our Mishnah has its own Kabbalah all the way back from Chagai's Chayu Malachi. And David Zolti raised an interesting question. Vosapes Chagai's Chayu Malachi, like, do we ever find that like they were miyasid any Psak Halacha? So it's an interesting comment that the Gemara makes, is that this psak that our Mishnah has goes back and is sourced to Chagai Zchariah Malach. Gewaltig. Then the Gemara talked about the halacha of etzem kesoira, a small bone piece that's the size of a barley will be metama with mago and masa, but it will not be metama with oil. We're going to learn shortly how we know that, where we see that in the Torah. And then Even Haschuches means if you have a barrier that has, it's a stone barrier and some stones stick out from the barrier. So they form a little bit of an awning. If you walk under those barriers, even though you know that there was tumah under one of them, so you're walking under a series of awnings, and there's tumah under one of those awnings, but you don't know which one, that's tumah midirabanan. It's not tumah midiraisa, because since it's a suffix tumah b'shus harabim, it's veikaitar. That was Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, and now we'll go to Nun Gimel Amud Beis, where the Gemara says, the Gemara quotes a very fascinating machlokes. Our Mishnah says that if you have an Aver min achai or an Aver min ames that doesn't have a bone that's the size of a sa'ira, but there's enough meat on it that if it would be connected to a healthy person, it would grow back. That is metama tumas meis and metama ba'oil. It's the highest level of tumah. So the Gemara declares, okay, that's only if it has enough meat on it. What if it didn't have enough meat on it? Is it totally tar? Or maybe it's still metama v'maga uv'masa. The Gemara brings a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan said, we have psukim to tell us that with enough meat on it, it's metama ba'oil. We don't have anything else. So we have to assume that if it doesn't have enough meat on it, it's not tamei at all. Well, Rish Lakish said, no, we do have a makar to say that even though there's not enough meat on this aver, we'll still say that it has tumas mag. And the Gemara quotes a brisa to show where Rish Lakish got it from, which pasuk he got it from, and then the Gemara has to say how Rabbi Yochanan explains it away, why it's not a right. So in the process, the Gemara brought the pasuk that talks about tumas oil. We're going to be focused on the second brisa, which is talking about tumas maga, because that's where this is relevant. But nevertheless, the Gemara first starts with the brisa that quotes the pasuk that deals with tumas oil. And I'm just trying to find the pasuk at the side of the Gemara here. V'chal asher yiga al pnei hasoda, v'chal al cherev, oy v'meis, oy v'metzav adam, oy v'kaver yitma shivas yamin. And the Gemara brings in the drasha that this pasuk is really speaking about tumas oil. And the Gemara says, when it says in the pasuk, al pnei hasoda, it means oil, because al pnei, on top of the field, that's an oil. B'chalal, that's Eber min achai. V'yesh le'halas arucha, which is the case in our Mishnah. That's a tumas oil. Cherev harezek halal. We know there's a rule that a cherev that touches a mace is not an avatuma like a person who touches a mace. Rather, it's an avia voisatum. Where exactly that applies and how it applies, we'll discuss today. There'll be a detailed discussion today in Tosfos how cherev harezek halal works. The oibe mace, from those words in the pasuk, we learn that Ever min mace. Again, another case in the Mishnah that talks about tumas oil. And oibe etzem adam, that teaches you that a roiva tzomos is tamei, and oibe kever is a kever sosum. We learned what a kever sosum is. We know that if there's just a mace lying there, the tum is by kever oila by kever, meaning anything that goes right over the mace will become tamei. Anything that's right under the mace will become tamei, no matter how far away they are separated in height. So you can have a mace lying on the floor, you can have a plane flying over it at 30,000 feet, and any person who goes over the mace will be tamei. I'm not getting into the shaila of whether the airplane itself is an oil that would shield it, but assuming that there's no shield, no matter how high you are, if you're right over the mace, you will become tamei. Or vice versa, if the mace is on the plane and you're below it, you'll become tamei as well. That's the halacha of a regular mace. Then there's the halacha of a kever and the kever sosum. A kever sosum is someone who's in a kever, which means there's four walls around him, and there's a ceiling, and there's a tavach between the top of the mace and the ceiling, which makes it into an oil. But it's an oil sosum because it's sealed on all four sides. From this pasuk, you learn that what that does is it expands the guf to the entire area of the kever, and that also is matama just like the guf is, all the way up and all the way down. So even if the plane lies over, it's not directly over the mace, but it's over a part of the kever where the mace is not in, but it's still over that kever, that sealed area, it will still be tamei. However, if you don't have sealed four walls around the kever, maybe one wall or part of one wall is missing, then the tumah is contained, and if you fly over it, there is no tumah at all. So that was a little bit of a diversion because we're looking primarily for a source of Rish Lakish, who says that even if the aver does not have enough meat on it, nevertheless, it will still be tamei b'maga. We just quoted the pasuk that's talking about tumas oil. But on Amar Aleph, on Nun Dalet Amar Aleph, is where the brisa gets into the pasuk that's discussing tumas maga. So let's have a look at the pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'lokach ezoiv v'tavel b'mayim ishtar." So it's talking about the process of being retire somebody with the paraduma. He's all the oil of alcohol, kalim al nefashos asher hayu sham. Val hanageya. No, actually, we're not talking about that. I'm not even sure what this is referring to, but it's definitely talking about a tahira because it says Val hanageya be'etzem or bechalal or bemeis or becover. Yeah, this is the pardon. So it's talking about tumas negia maga. What are you touching? Be'etzem or bechalal or bemeis or becover. Again, we have 4 pratim from which the Gemara and the Brisa is going to learn halachas. So let's talk about this. Zok Heilige Gemara. It says be'etzem ze'etzem kasayr. Where do we know this rule that an etzem, the size of a barley kernel, you become tameh if you touch it? You know it from this pasuk of be'etzem. So this is a good trivia question. Everybody knows that etzem kasayr is tameh. Where do you know it from? You know it from the pasuk be'etzem. The next halach is oy bechalal. What do we mean from halal? Ze'ever hanechlal min hachai ve'ein boy kedei ve'ein boy lahalai sarupa. This is a neighbor that fell off of a chai, and it doesn't have enough meat to grow back. This is exactly the case that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are arguing about. Now, is this pasuk bechalal ze'ever hanechlal min hachai? Does that mean that there was the bone was etzem kasayra? It can't be, because if the bone was etzem kasayra, I don't need a pasuk of halal to tell me that it's tamei. I already know from be'etzem that it's tamei because of the etzem kasayra. So from the fact that we have a pasuk b'halal telling you that ever anechal menachai ve'ein boy lahalas arucha, that's exactly Reish Lakish's case. You have a neighbor, you don't have a bone that's the size of a sayra, so there's no tamei emanating from there. Yet the pasuk still says that this aver is tamei b'maga. So you have a chloride to Reish Lakish. Oy b'meis the aver hanechal min hameis. Oy b'kover Reish Lakish kever shalofnei adibur. That's kever shalofnei adibur that I want to put aside for now because I want to focus on the raya to Reish Lakish. So the Gemara asks, "Hi aver min hameis." The aver min hameis that we just darshaned that we know from the pasuk of b'chalal or b'meis. I'm sorry, b'meis. What is the case? If it does have a small bone in it, the size of a sayra, well then hainu hanageh be'etzem. So I don't need a pasuk to tell me that that's tamei. I know it from be'etzem. Elot must be that the pasuk is referring to a case to less be'etzem kasayra. There wasn't even a bone in this aver the size of a sayra. And nevertheless, Rachmana Rabbi, the Torah is telling us this is tamei. It's tamei b'maga. So you have a clear right to Reish Lakish. Not at all. Let's say even the case of the aver, it's speaking where there is a bone that's the size of a sayra. Why do I need a pasuk to tell me it? I know it from that. So the Heilige Gemara, you're right. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that if you touch a bone the size of a sayra, that you're tamei. But who said that if you merely carry it, you didn't even touch it, you just lifted it up? Who said that will make you tamei? Well, you know it from hameis, b'meis. So that is the Gemara. So there's a couple of problems we have to deal with. The first problem is Tosfos' kasha. The Brisa says oy b'meis is an aver hanechal min hameis. Rabbi Yochanan wants to say that this oy b'meis is telling you that since there's a bone here that's the size of a sayra, it's mitama b'masa. So that's exactly what the Brisa should have said. The Brisa doesn't say that. The Brisa is talking about an aver hanechal min hameis. The Brisa should say ze etzem kesayra the mitama b'masa. That Tosfos is kasha, which he does not answer. And I'll just point out where Tosfos is. It's in the middle of the intermediate width lines. And the Gemara, Tosfos asks over here, towards the end of the Tosfos, the ksas kasha, for Tosfos. So 4 lines down in the intermediate lines. Dimkein Maika Omar, what does the Brisa say? Oy b'meis ever nechol min hameis. V'isbeit kesara. It should say lemezu etzem kesara. That's what the Brisa should have said. So that's a kasha. I have another kasha, which I believe is a klotz kasha, but I don't know the answer. So I'm going to ask the olim. Maybe somebody could help. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that you're learning oy b'meis, not to tell you a halacha about a ever nechol min hameis. Rather, it's talking about the regular halacha of etzem kesara, teaching you that it's metama b'masa. So then, what do you need hachalal? Oy b'chalal. Oy b'chalal is that ever ad nechol menacha. If you learn b'shlema like Rish Lakish, that we're learning that even an ever that doesn't have enough meat on it to be tummy to soil will still be tummy b'maga b'masa. So I understand you have a pasuk for an ever menachai, and you have a pasuk for an ever menameis. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, that the only halacha you're learning extra here is that etzem kesara is also matame b'masa. So it's enough to have the pasuk of oy b'meis. Why do I need a pasuk of oy b'chalal? That's something that I cannot get my head around, and I don't understand it. But nobody asked the kasha, so there's probably a pasuk to answer, but I just don't know the answer. So if anybody has a suggestion, I would very, very much appreciate if you share that with me. Okay, so let's see the Gemara Vayta. Umaza b'shlishi u'b'shishi u'b'shvi v'soiser. So if we look back at the Mishnah on Mem Tes Amud Beis, the Mishnah tells us that all of those items that were listed in the Mishnah, which is someone who touches a mace and someone who touches a part of kazais from the mace, someone who touches Ephraim Nachai, all those things that are metama, the halacha is what you need to do is you need to get your hazah of shlishi and shvi. The nazir has to be matar himself, and then however many days he counted before he became tamei, he loses and he has to start again from scratch. So, and it says in the Mishnah, when does he start counting the new cycle from scratch? After he becomes tahor. The lashon is v'soiser, and he starts counting again when he becomes tahor. I don't want to run back to Mem Tes Amud Beis. It takes a couple of minutes till I go back and forth, but we're focusing on the line in the Mishnah where it says that you don't start again ad sheyitahar. So the shaila is, what does ad sheyitahar mean? Iboilu. That the Mishnah says. That when do you start counting day one of your Naziris? Is when you became Tar. When are you doing it? So let's just discuss what happens. The Nazir became Toma Mace, gets Azah on day 3, and then on day 7. Then at the end of the day 7, he goes to the mikveh, or right after he gets his second Hazah, he goes to the mikveh, and then the next morning, day 8, he has to bring a chatos, an ocham, and an oila. That is the process of a nazir who became tamei. The question is, at what point in this process can he start counting the new cycle? So on Daf Yud Ches, we actually had a 4-way machlekes. There was the shita of Rabbi Eliezer who holds that on day 7 already, he's allowed to start counting day 1 of his new Naziris. There was the shita of Rabbi who says, first thing in the morning, as soon as daybreak happens and he's already able to bring karbanos, that's when he can start counting. Then we had 2 more shitas. One mandamar held after he brings his chatos, and the other mandamar held after he brings his osham. So there was a 4-way machlokes. So the Gemara wants to know, how does our Mishnah hold? Our Mishnah is vague. It just says you start counting when you're metaher. What does that mean? So the Gemara, is that b'shvi? And we skip the next words. Tosfos erases this from the Gersa. Does this mean on day 7, after he gets his spritzing and after he goes to the mikveh, can he start counting day 1? Then and there, Umani Rabbi Eliezer, and I'll go like Rabbi Eliezer who holds you can start counting the new Naziris on day 7. Or maybe what the Mishnah means, that Sheyitar is on day 8. Umay at Sheyitar, and what Sheyitar means is at Sheyavi Karbonosov until he brings his Karbonos. So that could be like Rebbe, first thing in the morning, or it could be like the other Mandam, after you bring the Chatos or after you bring the Oth. Umani Rabbanani, and this would be inconsistent with Eliezer. Rather, it would be like the other Rabban. Zokamar Tashma. I think we can show you from our Mishnah who our Mishnah holds like. B'dikatani Seifa, because of the Seifa, which is the next Mishnah that we're about to learn. There, where it talks about someone who became Tameh, but it's not Soishers Nazirs. And if you remember, their cases of that were if he only touched a Revi'is Dam instead of two Revi'is, or if he only touched a Roiva Hakav of bones instead of a half a kav. So there he becomes Tameh Tumas Meis, but it's not Soiser. So there it says, B'dikatani Seifa, Maschil Umoyne Miyad. In the Seifa where he doesn't need to bring any karbanos, because it wasn't Soiser's Naziris, he just takes a break from counting during those days. He suspends the counting, but it doesn't break what he counted up until that point. There it says Maschil Umoyne Miyad, right after the second Hazah. Mashma, that's a different lashon from what the Mishnah used in our Mishnah of Achayitar. So Haresha my Achayitar Achayobi Karbanoisa. It must be that our Tana who said Achayitar means more than just after the Hazah. It must mean the next day. Umani Rabbanani, and it must go according to Rabbanan. The Amri Nazir to Tahara at Shmini Leichayla. You cannot start counting day one of your new cycle of Naziris until day 8. Beautiful. Aval. So up until now, we discussed all of the tumas that are Soiser and Naziris. Aval, however, the following tumas are not Soiser and Naziris. Tumah number 1 is Sechachos, which the Gemara will tell us is you're walking along a stone wall, and out of the stone wall above your head, there's little stones that stick out of Tafa. So basically a series of miniature awnings. And under one of these awnings, there's a kazayas tomim and a mace. Kazayas posam and a mace. If you go under that awning, you're going to be tomei. Now, you didn't walk under all of the awnings, because if you walked under all of the awnings, you're for sure tomei. But what if you walked under some of the awnings, but not all? That's a suffix. Now, normally the rule is suffix tomei, rishus harabim, svei kaitar. Since you're walking in the rishus harabim beside a wall, there's a suffix if you came into contact with tumah. Right in your Torah, there's a gzeir d'Rabbanan that you have to be tamei. That type of tumah d'Rabbanan, will not stir the Naziris. Vaperois. Oh, I apologize. I typed it completely wrong. What I just described, this stone fence, is perois. So I apologize. Perois is this stone wall. Sechachos is a tree canopy. A tree canopy, which the Gemara is going to elaborate on a little bit. A tree canopy where there might be tuma under one of the branches, that's also midaraisa tar or midarabanan dervatana. So schachos is a tree canopy. Perois are little awnings of stone that stick out from a stone wall. Uvesapras. A vesapras is if there's a caver, a dead body is buried under the ground, and someone plows the field. So it's going to basically chop up the body into tiny little pieces and spread it all around. So the halach is 100 amas on either side of this mace, whereas the distance that a plow could have dragged a small bone fragment, we are machmer that it's tamei mid'Rabbanan. So that's again a tamei d'Rabbanan. The eretz ha'amin, the Rabbanan made a gzeira that if you go into chutz la'aretz, you're tamei. Again, it's a tamei d'Rabbanan. Why the Gemara would make such a takana, we're going to see on Amud Beis. We're actually going to see a chilling comment in Tosfos. V'hagoylel v'hadoifik. There's a machlokes what goylel and doifik is. There's one sheet who holds goylel is the top of the coffin, and doifik are the walls of the coffin. Tosfos says it's difficult to say that that's the pshat because the Gemara learns that goylel and doifik are tamei from the words of al panei asadeh, which is mashma that they're visible in the field, but the coffin you don't see if it's buried. So therefore, Tosfos want to learn that the goylel is the actual matzeva, and doifik is the stone foundation that the matzeva is placed upon. They're talking again with Rabbanan. Revi'is dam, the Revi'is dam, which is basically a continuation of the first mission, which says that a chatzi kav of dam, which is two Revi'is, will shter the Naziris. The Revi'is dam will make him tamei, but it will not shter the Naziris. The oil reiva tzomos, and if you made an oil over a roiva tzomos, again, a chatzi kava tzomos will stir the naziris. A roiva will not. The kelim anogim b'meis, and if you touch a keli that touches a mace, so if a keli touches a mace, the mace is an avia voice, the keli becomes an av. If you touch that keli, you only become a rishon. You go to the mikvah, and that's it. So naturally, it won't stir the naziris. Ubimei sifrai, ubimei gomrai. Bimei sifrai and bimei gomrai are referring to a mitzayir. The way a mitzayir works is he comes to the kohen with tzaras. The kohen locks him up for observation. During that period of time, he's not tummy. And the Mishnah, as soon as we turn over onto the Amud Beis, we'll say that beferish. While he's under observation, he's not tummy. If he gets condemned after his observation, that's called bimei gomra. That suspends his count. That's not soiser, but it suspends his count. So while he's tummy, he's a mitzayir vadai, he cannot count days towards his naziris. Then he gets healed from his naziris. Now he has to count 7 days. That's bimei safra. When he's counting towards his tahira process, that during that period of time, his naziris count is also suspended. So bimei safra, bimei gomrai, al elu ena nazim megalayach. This will not require a giluach of tumah. However, some of these cases, the one that are tumas meis, are going to be mazeh b'shlishi u'b'shvi. They do need tahira. They do need the tahira of the paradum. Okay, we'll turn over on Talmud Beis. The Einei Soiser Sakaidim, all of these don't destroy the count. It suspended the count, but it doesn't destroy the count. Umaschil umoyne miyat. That was the dict that the Gemara made a minute ago, that you don't have to wait till day 8. On day 7 already, you could continue counting. So if you're up to day 10, you can start counting day 7 as day 11 of your naziris. The carbon einlod, and you don't have to bring a carbon, the carbonis that a nazir that became tummy would bring, which are the chatas, the asham, and the oila. No carbonis required.
You see?
I'm sorry.
Why would you do mazda b'shlishi?
Because he's tummy tumas makes.
Meter abundant.
No, the roiva of roiva kava tzamos is metamehim midorais.
So that's the only one it's referring to?
Roiva and also the roiva haka, also the revius of da. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see weiter. However, the Yimei Azova, if someone's Azov or Azova, or if we may have scarish or Mitzayir, when the Mitzayir is merely under observation, those days actually count towards his Naziris. Even though he's counting for Mitzayir or he's counting Shiva Nekiyim for the Zov and the Zova, it's not a contradiction to the Naziris, and you can continue your count for the Naziris. Zok to Gemara. Oh, you know something? Before we do the Gemara, I omitted something very important on Amud Aleph. So I'm going to go back to Amud Aleph because I never explained what does it mean, a kaver, what was the lashon? Zeh kaver shlefnei adibur. A kaver from before the Torah told us about Tumas Meis. So let's see what this means, and let's look at Tosfos inside. It's a fascinating Tosfos. It starts on the 4th line from the top of the Amud. Oy bekever, Shimon Lakashaymer, Zeh kever shalafnei adibur. What does it mean, Tosfos? Shekoydim Matan Torah. Someone who was buried before Matan Torah, before we had the halachas of Tum and Tahira, the Chiddush here, the Pasuk tells you that that's also Matam. V'tzarachin, it's going to be difficult to understand this, l'Rabbanan de Rab Shimon, according to the Rabbanan, who argue on that famous psak of Rab Shimon, the Amri, Af Kivrei Oivdik Echav Metamin Ba'oil. The Rabbanan hold that Goyim, their Kvarim are also Metamin Ba'oil. How do we know, how does Rab Shimon know that the the kvarim of goyim are not metame boil, because it says in the pasuk Adam kiyamis boil, and we have a drasha atem kruin Adam and goyim are not kruin Adam. So therefore, the tumas ha'oil Adam kiyamis boil only applies to yidden, not to goyim. The Rabbanan disagree, and the Rabbanan know that tumas oil applies to goyim as well. So I becover. So what does he do with the pasuk of I becover? I don't need it to tell me that a kever shalof ne'adibur is tummy, because a guy's kever is tummy. So even a guy's kever is tummy. So before a dibur, all we were like a guy. V'yeshloimar the Reb Shimoni. You'll have to say that this brisa here that uses I becover to tell you that even a kever shalof ne'adibur is tummy. That's going to go to Reb Shimon. What will the Rabbanan do with Oiba cover? I don't know. They'll have to have a different limit for it. Miu Kashich still swear. Why? The Gavin Gia Moide Rab Shimon, the Kivri Oivd the Chav Metamim, the Magav Matza. Rab Shimon is Moide that if you touch the cover of a guy, it will be tummy. It's only tumas oil that doesn't apply to the cover of a guy. And that's going to be very schwer, because once again, if I know that their kaver is tamei, so why don't you cover? And it's hard to say that this disagrees with Ravina. But Riva Pirish, the Riva was Mafarish. What does it mean? Kaver shalafnei adibar. It means gam oison shemesu achar matan Torah. The gears it changes. It's referring to people who died after matan Torah. Kodim shenemra parshas tumas meis. So, David, we were discussing earlier, David showed me how not everybody holds that Parah Aduma was Nitztava B'Mara, which is before Matan Torah. So I thought Avishita holds that it was Nitztava by Matan Torah. Here, Tosus is saying it's possible that the parsha of Adam Kiyamas Be'oil was told us after Matan Torah. Because that's what Tosus want to say over here. His shita is, Kevesh Lefnei Adibar Gam Oisin Shemesu Acher Matan Torah. People who died after Matan Torah, but before the pasuk said Kodim Shenemer Parshas Tumas Meis, the Sogadad Chamina, when it says Adam Kiyamas Ba'il and Parshas Tumas, it means anybody from here on moving forward who dies be Parshas Nuvaila. But anyone who died prior to now, even though they were Jews, even though we already had Matan Torah, that's not going to have a din tumah.
I'll tell you why that's problematic. At Har Sinai, after the Chet Egel, 3,000 people were killed by the Levim themselves. Okay? Mila Hashem Elai, and then Moshe Rabbeinu told him to go kill all those people that were Chayiv Misa. So how would they killed somebody with a sword. So how could they be matar themselves without a Porah Aduma?
So maybe they didn't become Tomei. They didn't become Tomei until the parsha of Adam Kiyamas Boil, until the Torah told them the parsha of Chukas. But maybe the parsha of Chukas didn't happen by Matan Torah. Maybe it happened a little bit later, and they weren't Tomei. So
I think
until then.
There's a Gemara that says that 8 parshios were given at the Chanukas HaMishkan. When later are you talking about?
I don't know. I'm just reading Tosus who says between Matan Torah and when the parsha of Tumas Meis was said. But Tosus doesn't tell us when.
Okay, well, it had to be before they did before they brought stuff to the Mishkan, until they brought Korbanos to the Mishkan. You weren't allowed to go into the Mishkan.
Didn't they have almost a year from Matan Torah?
Well, Matan Torah was on Vav Sivan, and the Chanukas HaMishkan was on Nisan, the first day of Nisan.
So it's almost a year later. 10 months later.
Yeah. So what are you arguing? That it wasn't given? Wasn't that given at Har Sinai? We have the Bahar, the first Rashi in Bahar, that says all the mitzvahs were given at Har Sinai.
I don't know. I don't know.
Right? What is it? What's the kasha? Why does it say?
Just like this was said with Har Sinai, so do all the lepers.
Right. Anyway.
maybe the halacha paraduma was said, but the words Adam Kiyamas Ba'oil, which is from where we learned Tumas oil, maybe that wasn't said until later. So maybe we do the halacha paraduma if someone touched the mace, but maybe the concept of Tumas oil wasn't unveiled until later.
Maybe. Just
But
not
it's very
mistaber.
sure because there's no known point where new tzivuyim were introduced.
Yeah. Well, there was actually.
Where
Yeah, Pesach Sheni, there was B'nai Slavcha, there were other things that were introduced afterwards.
but those are clearly identified what they were and when they were.
Yeah,
Tosis is
yeah,
saying that
right,
that
yes.
the Tumas oil was
Right.
stuck in somewhere without
Right.
any sukkim that ever introduced it.
Yeah. It's a bit of a mystery. Somebody must talk about this, no?
I looked around, but I didn't look everywhere, so I didn't see anything. When I say I looked around, I turned to the back of the Masifta and I looked at the Yalkut Biur. That's called looking around.
Okay.
But it's an interesting Tosis. So that's the Tosis says maybe that's what it's referring to. And the Chiddush is that even those Mesim are going to be taught. Then Tosis says something else fascinating. And I'm going to skip a little bit. Makshin Reb Shimon, Amai Hava Ravino Mitzayin Ma'arish Machpela Beperek Cheskes Abata. It's going to be a little bit sure. Ravino, he marked off all of the Ma'arish Machpela. The question is, all the people who are buried in the Ma'arish Machpela died long before Matan Torah, so there shouldn't be any tumah there. So why would he mark it off? And you can't say he marked it off just to mark it off, because in Moed Katan it says, Ein mitzayin al dover she'ein b'tama ba'oil. So if that's the case, the way we're learning now that people who died before Matan Torah don't have it in Tumas oil, so why was the Ma'arish Machpelah marked? Well, Imar Riva, an interesting thing. Who is mitama ba'oil? Adam kiyamas ba'oil. The Shaper Karya Adam Arishon. Adam Arishon it's a very appropriate when the Torah says Adam Kiyamas Be'oil, that it's also referring to Adam Arishon. And Avram, who was Ha'adam Hagadol Ba'anokim. And what about Yaakov and Yitzchak? I guess the same thing. They were so great that even though they were before Matan Torah, we will say that the word Adam, Kiyamas Be'oil, refers to them as well. Interesting concept. Inami, the Kosovar Mikever Shalafnei Adibur Narba Kever Shalacher Adibur Shalacher Matan Torah. I don't even know what these words mean. Let me see if the Marab Meranchberg explains it. Gimel Teva Shalacher Adibur should be Nimchak. So it should have said Shalafnei Adibur. So let me just look at the Tosis again using his Girsa. The Kosover Mikever Shalafnei Adibur Narba Kever Shalacher Matan Torah. I'm not sure what it means, but I'll call upon them. It's a very interesting Tosis that talks about when Tumas Mace and Tumas oil, where it originated, when did it start. Okay, so let's get back to Amud Beis, which is where we're up to. Okay, we're up to the Gemara. The Elohim Eschachos Zok the Gemara. It's Elon Hamesach ala Arts. It's a canopy of a tree. Uprois are the stones of Avonim Hayotis Menaged. So let's see how Rashi explains Elon Hamesach ala Arts. The Perak Dam Anida Amar, the Gemara teaches us the Midaraisa lav oil ma'aldi. Midaraisa, the branches of a tree do not form a proper oil. So even if there's tum underneath it, and you're underneath it, you wouldn't be considered to be in an oil hames. Why? Each individual branch is too far from one another to be considered combined as one large canopy. The next words of Tosis I don't quite understand. The aim ben paisech tefach. I'm not open to tefach. I'm not sure how that's relevant. Rashi as Tosis af biyesh bevadai kezais minameis tachas achas mehen even though we know for sure there's a mace somewhere under one of the branches, nevertheless, it's midaraisa tar, when a tar, because even if you walk under all of them, you're tar, because this doesn't qualify as an oil midaraisa. For Rabbanan who goes to tuma, Rabbanan who goes to tuma for someone who goes under them, and Avonim Yotzim together, as we explained before, since you didn't go under all of them, you only went under some of them. It's a suffix tuma, which is a rabbin, which is fake or tar, and it's the chomer midrabban. The third item that the Mishnah mentions, if you go into chutz la'aretz, you become tamei. The eretz ha'amim. Iboilu frek the Gemara, eretz ha'amim. What exactly is the gzeira of eretz ha'amim, and how far does it go? Is it mishum avir gazur alei? Is it even the airspace? Is it such a chumradik gzeira that even if you go into the airspace of the eretz ha'amim and you know for sure you're not exposed to any type of tumas mace, it's just the airspace alone that the Rabbanan wanted prohibited you from going in there. They wanted to discourage you from going in there, so they made you tamei. And Tosfos explains, going mahalach, how could you be in the airspace without having your feet on the ground? Going mahalach b'sheda tevel migdal gedoynus yosim himself. You're in a big box, so a big box is like its own oil, so it will protect tumah from penetrating. She'ein mekabel tumah. A big box that's more than 40 saw is not mekabel tumah, because it's not. You cannot carry it mali v'reikon. When it's full, you can't carry it. So therefore, a very large box that can hold more than 40 saw is not makabel tumah. Or if you're on a bridge, you're not on the ground. Or nicholas bakar, if you go on a wagon, so you're not on the ground, the wagon creates a surface that protects any tumah from coming up through the ground. They're more strict with eretz ha'amim than even the oil mace. Why is that? They're trying to discourage people. Chazal were discouraging people from leaving Eretz Yisrael. That's one shot. No, they weren't trying to discourage people from leaving Eretz Yisrael. Rather, there is a chashash of tumah. You know why you're tumah when you walk in Chutz La'aretz? Because you never know if you're walking right over a dead body. And here Tosfos has a little bit of a chilling comment. Tosfos says, Dafka hamal al gusha. Dafka, if you are mal over a ground which might have a mace underneath it, gazru kamashamal al mace. Why? Even if they may say mabel, there are dead bodies scattered throughout the entire globe because the people who died during the mabel. We all know that Tosfos was in the time of the Crusades, where thousands of Yidden were brutally murdered all over the place. Pashtus, what Tosfos is referring to is he saw in his lifetime, the Balei Tosfos saw in their lifetime such brutal wholesale murder of Yidden left all over the place. There's a true chashash of tumas mace. But if you went with protection, meaning you weren't exposed to the oil, then they wouldn't have asked. So that is the question: what is the gzeira of eretz ha'amim? Zokimar Tashma, we could bring a raya from our own Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, Umaza b'shlishi u'shvi. You need the tahira of a paraduma if you go with eretz ha'amim. Let's think about it. The amrit mishum avira, if the tumah has nothing to do with a mace, it's just to discourage someone from going to chutz la'aretz. So hazah lamali. Why in the world would the remedy be hazah? Hazah is only something that discharges tumas mace, not something abundant like a tumah that's just there to discourage somebody from going to the chutz la'aretz. So from the fact that the Mishnah lists all a bunch of different tumas, included in the list is tumas eretz ha'amim, and the remedy that the Mishnah prescribes is hazah shlishi u'shvi, and alav mishum gusha, must be because there's a chash that you're being mal over a mace, and therefore it's logical that the Chum say do hazah. So going back to Rav Moshe's question, you see, even if it's a tumah d'Rabbanan, misafek, you still would need hazah shlishi u'shvi. Zok to Gemara law, you don't have a raya. We could still say that the tumah of eretz ha'amim is mishum avira. You're going to ask me, why do you need hazah shlishi u'shvi? In fact, you don't. And when the Mishnah said shlishi u'shvi, It wasn't referring to all of the cases in the Mishnah. It was referring to some of the cases in the Mishnah. When it says in the Mishnah, you need Azar, Shlishi, Shvi, it's not referring to all the cases. It's not referring to the case of Eretz Amen. And Hakadam Mistabra, and I'll prove it to you, because there's other items listed in the Mishnah that also don't need Azar, Shlishi, and Shvi. And what are those? The Mishnah says if you touch Kalim, that touch the mace, you're also Tamei. Let's think about it. Would you need Hazar, Shlishi, Shvi if you touch the Keli that touch the mace? Hana Kalim, B'nei Hazar Inam, the Keli that touch the mace becomes an Avatuma. If you touch that Keli, you become a Rishon Latuma. A Rishon Latuma doesn't need Hazar's Paraduma. It must be that when the Mishnah says you need Shlishi and Shvi, it's not referring to every case in the Mishnah, it's only referring to some of them. Correct touches a bomb kasha. How could you tell me that if you touch a keli that touches a mace, you're only a rishon? We know there's a rule of cherev hareyu k'chalal, which means if it's a metal keli that touches a mace, it does not become an avatum. It becomes an avi avoisatoma. So maybe our Mishnah is referring to you touched the metal keli that touched a mace, and you in fact are avatuma, and you need a zor shlishi ushvi. So what is our Gemara saying? That from Kalim we know that the hazor shlishi ushvi doesn't apply to that case. And this is Tosfos Kasha, and it leads into a fascinating blend of different shittas in how cherev hareu k'chalal works. So let's just first quickly look at Tosfos 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth wide line right in the middle of the line. In time of Tosfos, Belishni lay the honey kalim b'chli matkas mari. Say the Mishnah is speaking about metal kalim. The other man agir behem hamei tumas zayin uvoy azor gimel b'zayin dechkerek chalal. If you touch the metal keli that touched the mace, you are a regular tumah mace. It's just like you touched the mace. So Tosfos v'aymer Rabbeinu Tam. Our Mishnah cannot be talking about metal kalim. You know why? Because if it was metal kalim, meaning it's as if you touched the mace, well, if it's mamish as if you touched the mace, then the Nazir would be soiser as well. If Tosfos is learning cherev hareu k'chalal, literally makes the cherev into an actual mace. If the cherev is an actual mace, Avada would be soiser the minion of Naziris. So it can't be speaking about a metal keli for that reason. So you see Tosfos holds that when a metal keli touches a mace, it becomes tamei like a regular mace. Zok Rabbeinu Chaim, that's impossible. Rabbeinu Chaim has a murdika ha'ara. Ezabas is typically the eich nazir megalecho. How could you, even if you hold cherev k'chalal, I disagree with you that it makes it mamish like a mace. And avada the nazar wouldn't be migalech, and I'll prove it to you. Because you know there's two halachas that travel together. Whether a kohen is allowed to be mitama to it, and if it's soiser and naziris. Because a kohen, his iser is not just tumas mace. It has to be from a mace. Just like a nazar, it has to be from a mace. So if you're going to tell me that the nazar is megalech on it, then by definition, a kohen would not be allowed to touch a cherev, a metal keli that touched the mace. And therefore, a kohen would not be able ever, Dr. Tosfos, who akidin the kohen muzralov, the ein loch bayish she'ein bo shum kli matchish shahaya ba'ayel ameis or shum ismar. There is no house in the world that doesn't have metal in it. So a kohen would never be able to go into any house, because how does he know that no one ever died in that house? And if there was even a mace in that house for 1 second at any given time, there was metal, small little piece of metal. There could be a little screw, a little bolt, any little metal keli could be in the house that he can't be sure is not there. And that metal keli would have been mekabel tumah, mitumas oil from the mace, and that keli is going to now give off tumas oil to the kohen. So if you're going to hold that a kohen is prohibited from being metama even to a metal keli that became tamei from a mace, well then kohanim can never go into any houses, because if at any given time in the past there was ever a mace in that house, he's done. He can never go in. So this means that Rabbi Chaim held that not only will the metal be mekabel tumah from a mace and become just like a mace through tumah soil, it will also transmit tumah through tumah soil. That is a very big machlekes rishonim. There are some rishonim who hold neither will metal be mekabel tumah through oil, nor will it transmit tumah through oil to become just like the mace. If it touches a mace, then it becomes like a mace. And if something touches it, that will become tummy as well. But it doesn't work with oil. So there's a sheet that holds that metal could only become tummy by touching. It could become tummy with oil, but it only gets the din of adaviyah voisa tumah only if it touches. Or even if it could become tummy through oil, it will only be metama something if it touches it. So that would solve the problem of kohen. So that's the first information I wanted to share, is that the shaila of cher v'reik halal, the question is, does it work with tumas oil, or maybe only if it touched? The other fascinating thing is what Tosfos quotes later from a Yitzchak Mitzim Point, who learns that this halacha of cher halal is bein b'chlimatches, bein b'shar kelim. We always know in our minds that it's a metal keli. A metal keli is what becomes halal. But there's a shita from a Yitzchak Mitzim Point that even a regular keli that's not made out of metal, you also say the same halacha of cherev kechalal. And it actually gets into something that's slightly relevant to our parsha, because it says in the pasuk, "V'chibastem bigdeichem b'yom hashvi utahartem," which tells us that if the begodim touch the person, if a person was tamei to mace and he's wearing begodim, the begodim become tamei just like him, and the begodim are not metal. So again, if someone's wearing begodim and he goes into an oil of mace, not only is he tamei 7 days, his begodim are tamei. So you see that begodim also become just like tamei mace. But the question is, when it says v'chibastem b'gdeichem, maybe it only means metal clothing. So the question is, can metal clothing be considered clothing? So Rabbi Tam says that tachshidei klimatkes are considered begodim. So therefore, maybe when it says v'chibastem b'gdeichem, it's speaking about someone who was wearing a metal beged. A metal beged, you say yarei kechalal. So you don't have a raya from v'chibastem b'gdeichem that even non-metal will become tamei like a halal. So where do they bring raya from? From Shmois, from Parshas Tetzaveh. It says Eila begodim asher yasu, and in the list of the begodim asher yasu at the beginning of Tetzaveh, the choshev tzitz, and one of the begodim is a tzitz. Now the tzitz is all metal. So Tosfos wants to bring a raya from here that you could refer to an all metal item as a beged. However, there are the Rishonim who argue and who say, if you look closely at the pasuk, the tzitz is actually not mentioned. The tzitz is actually not mentioned in that pasuk. So there are those who change the gears here in Tosfos. But just to summarize, when it comes to cherev halal, there's a question is if it applies even to non-metal. There's a question whether it applies to tumas oil or only to masmaga on the becoming tamei, as well as on the transmitting tamei. And with that, we could stop. Thank you very much. Baruch Hashem, we got through the daf, and Be'ez Hashem, we will tomorrow. Yes.
You have a little time?
Sure. But just tomorrow, I'm saying sure at 7, not at 9. And even at 7, I'm not yet sure if I'm going to do it in the Aguda or if I'm going to do it from the road, because I am trying to leave at 5 in the morning if I'm able to. So I might only say share online. So it's for those who normally only come through Zoom, it doesn't make a difference. But for those who come in person,